Good morning, everyone, and welcome here at our third webinar of our trilogy, Chances in the Change. You've just heard that we're recording, so if you prefer not to be on camera with your video, you can take off your video. Let me start by thanking Jorn Fokkens, who's HR and Change Manager at Sia Partners. Sia Partners is a managing consulting firm that has been founded 20 years ago in France and 10 years ago in the Netherlands. Welcome, Jorn, and thank you very much again for sharing your expertise with us. I also would like to thank Nelly Verlinde, who's digital HR specialist at Talentsoft. And Talentsoft is a European leader in cloud-based talent management and learning software. So thanks again. This is the third, like I said, of a trilogy in HR. And for those who missed one or even two of the first webinars, Jorn is going to give a small recap in the beginning. So the third one, this one will be logical for you as well. Just as a small reminder, the first topic we had was how to engage and stay connected while social distancing. The second webinar was about how to unlock the wisdom of the crowds. And this third is about digital leadership. We already entered a digital era, but due to COVID-19, it has really accelerated. So it's more important than ever as a leader to be able to keep connected, to stay connected to your employees. This is also the most difficult topic because as a leader, you really need tools, but you also need competences and you need skills in order to stay connected and to be able to always unlock the wisdom of the crowd. So Jorn is going to tell you all about it. We have saved 1 hour and a half even for this webinar. This webinar will be around an hour, but for those who would like to stay and still ask questions afterwards or brainstorm a little bit, we are still available then after the official part, I could say. Before I give the floor to Jorn, I would like to launch a poll. And before I launch a poll, I think the best is if you ask your questions within the chat during the whole webinar, and Nelly Verlinde will from time to time take a moment and to ask those questions to Jorn as well. So do not hesitate to ask your questions in the chat, and at the end, I think it would be nice if it's more interactive, and then you can unmute yourself and we can speak. But during the webinar, I would suggest that you would ask your questions in the chat. So the first poll, they're anonymous, so please just don't hesitate to answer. I give you a few seconds to give your answer, and then I will share your results. Last few seconds for those who did not answer yet. I share the results with you. So 89% said is here to stay. 11 said was only useful during COVID. So it's an interesting one. I'm going to stop shares, launch the poll, and I'm going to give the floor to Jorn Fokkens from Sia Partners. Jorn, floor is yours.
Thanks, thanks Sylvie for introductions and for hosting all these and organizing all these webinars. It's a pleasure to do that, and thanks for the audience for being with us. we're going to talk about digital leadership indeed, and a very interesting topic for me. And I think it is also an interesting one for most of us, as leadership is always an interesting topic. What I'll do is, let me see how I can go to the next slide. This session, I would like to talk about 5 topics. We would like to bring back a little bit, couple of items on the last 2 sessions, because they are also a bit of a foundation for this webinar. I would like to then put a couple of characteristics of the digital era. What do we understand for this digital era? This was started long before COVID, and what does it mean? So have a view on that one. And then we want to talk about mainly the digital leader. And so I thought we'd talk about what would be the skills, the typical characteristics, and the mindset of a digital leader in a digital era. And I would like to then take you to a couple of items that I think is very important to for a digital leader to create and to facilitate. So trust, talent, and creativity. I think they're key enablers for mobilizing and the workforce, and how to bring out that talent and collective wisdom and innovation. And then I'd like to end up with saying, how do you then orchestrate that workforce? How do you really mobilize that? And how difficult is that to do? Do please put your questions in the chat. It would be boring without your comments, your views, your ideas. We think we are co-creators, so it's really worthwhile when you share your views in the chat, and then Nelly will pick them up and pause me when I talk too much. So I encourage you to do that. So let's have a couple of items on the last websites. We talked, this all started because of COVID-19, obviously. We were going to work from home, still do. It's a remote world, and a lot of businesses were really on hold and hit. And how do you cope with that? How do you deal with that? And how do you keep innovating in times of crisis? So we talked about the VUCA world, and VUCA is a typical expression. It's velocity, uncertainty, it's complexity and ambiguity. Now, it's not a new word, but it seems to just increase those 4 acronym letter words in its how severe that is, and how do we answer to that? So we thought we talk around it, about it, and VUCA is for us just another explanation in that we need to work with speed, and we need to keep innovating. We need to live with uncertainty and how to deal with that. We also talked about engagement. Engagement is not new, but in this remote world, we wanted to talk about virtual engagement. So we did a session on how to virtually engage your people, your workforce. And I will show you a slide next to this one, why that is so important. And then well-being is increasingly important and very much high on the agenda of every HR manager nowadays, and should be for every other leader. Because when you are healthy in several aspects, your output as an employee will also be bigger. I'll show you another slide on that one. Then we talked about collaboration, and of course that is mainly digital collaboration. And we addressed the topic of diversity and inclusion. And also that we noticed with some research that this is increasingly higher on the agenda. Diversity and inclusion is a broad container word, but it covers really a lot, how to really include every other employee. So we also address the wisdom of the crowd, but everybody needs to be belonging and feel safe, psychologically safe, no matter where you come from, what your ideas are, and race and gender, etc., etc. And as a group here, we are looking at the chances of the change. We're the pioneers in saying the glass is half full. We're looking at the chances, yeah. So we think it's an opportunity. Let's not waste that. To be more blunt, let's never waste a good crisis, if you will. So just to go back, we like this slide. There's always this typical iceberg where in a normal world, when COVID was not here, there's a lot of characteristics, behaviors that you could not see. So there's processes, authority, strategy, there's becoming more clear, and rules, engagement. But some values or mentalities and feelings are never clear. Now, with the arrival of COVID, the iceberg sort of felt more in the water. There's more that we cannot see. So there is an extra effort required to uncover any negative remote effects or anything that you cannot see. So that is what we call virtual engagement. And taking care of that well-being, because you cannot just meet somebody anymore. You need to really go and ask somebody on the phone through your digital connections to see how people are doing, and to include them, to make sure that they participate, that they belong and do not become lonely, etc., etc. So that typical iceberg sort of went more on the water, and we need to address it as such. And then we talked about the well-being, and well-being is also a container word, if you will. And we distinguished between the physical well-being, but also the emotional well-being. And then we talked a little bit about mental well-being, even spiritual well-being. And that well-being you could address, but then also an employee and also the leader needs to become digital. So digital well-being, without digital well-being, it is harder to even address it. We picked up another one recently that talked about financial well-being. So we see also more companies that even try to support employees with their financial well-being on a private matter. So that's also interesting. So well-being, high on the agenda, increasingly important, and very interesting to talk about. There are some levers on the left side. Stress. Stress is the main part of not feeling well. So how to reduce stress is an interesting way of addressing well-being. And with regards to diversity and inclusion, we said that it is very important because if you do this well, it increases your innovative capacity. When people are feeling safe, when they feel included, they would contribute in their creativity, and that creativity translates to innovation and new ideas. So all that world of diversity in all its assets help stimulate innovation, and so that was also clearly for us an important topic to address. So let me pause there and ask Nelly if there's any questions so far in looking back before we move on to this topic.
Yes, thank you, Jorn. Yes, before we get really started on the topic of this third webinar, so we got a really interesting remark from Vincent in the chat, who says it's regarding VUCA. He says we need to create the new VUCA: vision, understanding, clarity, and agility. I think that's a really interesting point of view. Jorn, I don't know what you think about that.
I'm familiar with that. I'm following Gert Leonard, who actually mentioned this, I think, and I completely agree. It is the answers to the classical VUCA worlds, and indeed, they are key to having a good mindset. So to understand first how to deal with that, you would answer it with those very interesting remarks of Vincent. Because that's what we need in this time and age. We need to live with those new words. So also VUCA is being innovated, if you will. So it's a really good remark, and I think we addressed it in one of the previous slides deck, that very translation. So thanks. It's a good reminder as well. Absolutely.
Yes, and I believe that we'll be talking about agility anyhow a bit later on in the webinar as well, right?
We do, because we have named it, and then I'm jumping ahead, as one of the trademarks of the digital leader. Correct.
Yeah, so that's it from the chat side. So I think we can continue.
We'll continue. Okay, great. Thanks, and keep those remarks coming. They're very good.
I suggest, sorry, that we maybe put off our camera, of our video, because the sound is not always as good. So maybe it helps when we take off our camera.
Shall I do the same, Sylvie, or shall I leave my camera on?
Sorry, I was already on mute. I think take it off as well, because then we can hear you loud and clear.
All right. Okay, good. All right. So I hope the sound is better. If not, do let Nelly know in the chat, and then we'll see what we can do to improve technique. So we were now going to enter the digital era. We are in this slide deck. I mean, we have entered the digital era a while ago. What do we mean with that? I love this this slide. This slide says something about human intelligence, that it is linear growing. Our collective human intelligence is increasing every other year, but linear. Yeah, so we're that's the human species, and that's how we cope with human intelligence. But of course, we have machine intelligence, the AI. And that started years ago with, next to nothing, but it's now exponentially increasing, to the point that a lot of people that are actually doing research are saying that within a couple of years, maybe 5 years from now, the artificial intelligence probably passed the collective human intelligence. And that's a very interesting phenomenon. What does this mean? The arithmetic calculations, we can never beat the machine anymore. But also in that mostly left brain of the hemisphere intelligence is just going to be done by machines. So is that a threat, or is it an opportunity? How do we look at that?
Jorn?
A lot of companies, yeah?
I have a poll for that one.
Tell me.
Shall I launch it?
Yeah, launch it.
So exactly the question, in fact, that asked Jorn. We are very curious to know your opinion. So I'm going to launch the polling, and you have again a couple of seconds to answer. So do you think digitization is a threat, opportunity, or does it have no impact? Two seconds. So I'm going to share the results. 90% says opportunity and 10% says threat.
Good.
Very interesting, because indeed there's a lot of discussion about it, of course, lately. So Jorn,
yes,
use it in your...
Yes, I'm glad we have the majority of the audience says it's an opportunity. I understand the threat part, especially when it comes down to a couple of jobs that may not longer exist. What we see as we are pioneering in Chance and Change, what the opportunity is that how many new jobs will come from it. But also with regards to, the big brother idea. So there is a clear warning as well. As long as we use our human brain wisely, we should always use intelligence in favor of us humans and rather not against us. And that's a little bit also the discussion that's going on in these times. But we think, and that's what we believe, is that this data, this intelligence, this digitization of everything should enable humans to become more human. That's how we would like to address this topic. But another interesting thing is that a lot of companies used to say gold is the standard, and became oil, and today it's data, remember? So data is the new gold. And now Arthur Clarke, already in the late 60s, said that data alone is not everything. Yeah? So data is not information yet. Yeah? Information is not yet knowledge, and knowledge is not yet wisdom. And you could even say wisdom is not foresight. The interesting part here is that a lot of us are saying data is the new gold. Data is, data-driven decisions. Everything is data, data, data. But it does not always mean that you have everything. You still need to translate that to wise decisions, to the right information. And I think that's the task of humans, and especially for digital leaders. So that's why I thought digital era. Is it disruption? Is it connectivity? What are we talking about? And how are we dealing with that? And it is here to stay. Yeah? We will not move machine intelligence, artificial intelligence. It's here to stay. So we have to deal with it. That's basically the storyline. With digital, we also think about digital strategy and digital organizations. Now, with digital strategy, we believe that it is more about redefining and enhancing human experience. So digital, what does it bring us? So the human experience is changing. That can be related to your employees or your end users, your customers. Digital strategy also is about transformative strategies. Your strategies are changing. And not just like an incremental change. It is, vastly changing, because business as usual is changing with digital. And of course, you would use the latest technologies. Technologies move up fast, they develop fast, they evolve very quickly, and that's something you need to deal with, to cope with. A typical digital organization, well, typical is difficult to say, but they are strong digital capabilities. They have a lot of digital capability in them. Of course, you could look at our tech giants, the Facebooks, the Googles, the Amazons of these worlds, but it is going to be more and more priority to have digital capability. Otherwise, probably you won't cope. It is also then, therefore, a stimulant to keep adapting to that new latest technology, because if you don't, others will, and they in terms of efficiency and arithmetic, they're always faster with digital than the humans are. So you need to cope with it, and you need to deal with it, and therefore changes are incrementally going to be faster. Change is part of your DNA in a typical digital organization. If you can disrupt it, if you can improve it, it will be done, because that's sort of the new normal. Your strategies probably no longer last than 6 months or even less. So there's limited time to make use of your latest strategy, your latest changes before technique has caught up with us. And that means constantly evolve your business strategy. So the interesting topic here is, yes, leadership. Are we talking about leadership in the digital era? We think we should be naming it digital leadership. This slide talks about how you look at organizations. We are used to having the typical pyramid. So there's often top-down steering and managing. There's typical hierarchies. The interesting thing from digital is, I think, we are moving much more to digital networks, and that it sort of also democratizes data and information. So from a typical view from the side, we would go to much more of a top view where we look at networks, where we think digital leaders are more networkers, digital webinars, if you will. Webbers is what Annemieke Robeck called it very interestingly. So the organizations in typical digital use technology and enhances those networks. They collaborate actively, proactively, if you will. They make sure that the networks have the connection between the people and the knowledge that there's to share and how to collaborate with that. So it's that is a flexible, it's a 24/7, it's high paced. When knowledge is out there, everybody is able to pick it up. And then you boost and augment that potential of your company. So that is shared decision making is much more with regards to inclusion, with regards to collaboration, with regards to mobilization of your workforce and interaction. The speed increases in adopting to new ideas and bringing out new innovative ideas forward. You need those networks for it. Yes, I hear maybe a question.
Yes, that was me indeed, Jorn. So when you say digital networks, could you perhaps give an example of what such a network could look like?
So with networks, there is of course the digital side of it with regards to enabling a network. So a digital network could be a social media, like you have the Facebooks of this world, but it's also how we use the networks with regards to like Zoom and how to be connected. But there's also artificial intelligence ways of connecting people with the right data. So that's the digital format, the digital technique, the infrastructure, that's digital. But the net itself with people is those who participate in that network and being digital savvy and understanding who is connected to whom, and who you keep on connecting. So it could be your team, it could be your own team as a leader in a team format or Teams that Microsoft uses. But then there could be a network through a bit old-fashioned email, etc. So then you've got the human networks that are facilitated by digital infrastructure. That's what we talk about networks. And these networks offer knowledge management. They offer you how to keep developing yourself with training, taking initiatives, bringing stuff forward, asking feedback, bouncing ideas off each other, getting input. So those digital networks help expand that collaboration and mobilization of the workforce and getting to know each other digitally. And we think that the digital leader is more of a character that sits sort of in the middle and sort of brings those things together as a connecting point. So the old hierarchical models probably apply less and less. They require equal footing with everybody, to be in touch with everybody. Just the other day, I sent out just a LinkedIn invite to a CEO of a big bank, and I was surprised, but the next day he accepted. So it's that is so much. You could not have imagined this 10 years ago, and even maybe 5 years ago. So that hierarchical framework sort of erodes and brings back a network of people that are having a mutual interest, and that's that are having maybe a similar network that you can see based on whatever on LinkedIn profiles. So also with regards to roles and functions, that is a new way of thinking, a new way of acting and collaborating. And even if you are not in the same company, it's worldwide and international, cross-boundary. So that's what digital leaders probably, and we talk about digital leaders after this chapter, is probably more and more the digital leader in a networked environment. Yeah, so any questions from that? Otherwise, we move on to the main part of this thing about the digital leader in ourselves.
So far, no questions
No
for now. No.
Excellent. So I already gave a flavor with that last slide on digital leadership. But now we want to...
Jorn, I'm gonna interrupt you because
Good.
actually there was a question popping up, so that's fantastic. And this question is about digital leaders. Are digital leaders themselves, by definition, also engineers? That's a question from Casper, and then there's also going to be a question from Sylvie, but let's start with the first one. So are digital leaders themselves, by definition, also engineers?
So the answer to that is no, they're not. I think digital leaders are digital savvy. They know how to use it, but not necessarily engineers. And it's a good thing. We will talk a bit more about this in the next chapter. Then when we're looking about the skills and the characteristics. But it would be too far to say that they are the engineer, because that would imply that they are sort of the makers of digital. They are the engineering digital, understanding bits and bytes, ones and zeros. I believe that the digital leader is a leader that understands how to use technology to enable what it needs to do in a company, get people out there to collaborate, bring the best of their talent, stimulate and motivate new ideas, make sure that everybody is involved and collaborate, and use the networks and digital tooling to do that. So that's how I would look at a digital leader. Of course, that can also be a digital leadership in engineering. So don't get me wrong, of course, engineers are also leaders, but it's not to say that any digital leader should be an engineer.
All right, thank you, Jorn. And then, so I have two other questions. The first one, I'm going to continue with the one on digital leaders for now, which comes from Karel. He says, I think regarding the slide, digital leaders in the middle, they are just part of the network, right? So Jorn, that's an interesting one, I think.
That's right. So in the middle, we think, or I think, that digital leaders are right in the middle. So what we hear sort of color-coded gray, but they're not gray at all in their characters. So very lively leaders that sort of are being more and more the spider in the web of their workforce and the companies. So they're the people, still the people to go to, and maybe also to make wise decisions based on data-driven decisions, as we always say. But in that network, in the spider web, they are very conscious of what's going on, but without the visibility per se in a face-to-face relationship. Yes, but are conscious of using the network to understand, how are my people doing? How do they collaborate? How do I follow that? And that is the spider in the web functionality, making sure that everybody is involved, aligned, supported, etc., to embrace new ideas, to embrace innovation, and how to move that forward, and how to make, therefore, fast decisions based on all that input, and sort of collecting the wisdom of the crowd that we talked about in the earlier webinars. So in the middle, that's right, as a networker.
Okay, so yeah, in the middle as a networker. All right, thank you, Jorn. We have another question that popped up in the meantime. So, by the way, this is fantastic. So if you have any thoughts or questions, just keep them coming and we'll try to answer them, of course. So I have a question from Hussein, and he said, you mentioned a couple of times digital savvy. How does a digital leader include employees who are not digital savvy and have problems, for instance, with a tool like Zoom or Clouds, etc. Now, Jorn, I know that we're going to touch on this probably a little bit further in the webinar, but perhaps you can just say a word or two on this question.
Yes, no, it's a good question, and indeed, Nelly, we will see it in the skills section. So the digital leader is also somebody that helps others become digital savvy. So a digital leader is also a person that does train and does help coach, mentor. And if there's one person in the group that is not digital savvy, but is the only way to keep on collaborating together, this leader makes sure that this person is going to be more digital savvy based on training. And it doesn't mean that he or she has to be training this person, him or herself, but you can at least offer the trainings out there to become and make yourself more digital savvy. And that in itself, digital trainings, online training, also becoming more and more easy to do. And if that doesn't work, of course, with well-being point of view, you would make sure you contact this person by any which way that the person feels comfortable with, and help this person become more digital savvy. Yeah, so it's a good question.
Yeah, it is a very good question. Thank you, Jorn. And then I have one final question before we move on. I think this is an interesting one as well, because I know we have people from both the Netherlands and France in the audience this morning. So this question is from Sylvie, and it is the development different in France than it is in the Netherlands? And then we're talking about this development, of course, from the old way of thinking in the more hierarchical structure, and then towards the new way of thinking.
So this is a really good question, and coming from Sylvia, I understand very much that in the Chamber of Commerce, this is an interesting topic. It also, we are also a company that have a French-Dutch axis, and the interesting part here, based a bit on my experience, but also doing some research with Hofstede, etc., what we think is that classically, the French tend to be a bit more hierarchical in how they run companies, whereas Dutch culture is a bit more, used to be a bit more, you could approach leaders a bit more directly and in your own words, and that relationships seems to be a bit more easygoing. In the Dutch environment, home working and work from home was always a concept that has been more widely accepted. Why? Because there seemed to be just a bit more trust that everybody would do their work from home, whereas in France, that kind of trust is not naturally there yet. So you hear stories about people come in the office and so the boss sees that you're in the office, and then you can also have a bit of command or control stuff. I have to be a bit more politically correct. So what we think is that for French, adopting to a digital leader in very general terms would take maybe a bit more effort than it would be for a typical Dutch culture. Of course, you should distinguish leaders and compare leaders with leaders, and not from a cultural background. But we do see a bit of that, and that relates back to Hofstede's analysis on leadership, with power distance, etc. You can look that up. So a very good question, a very interesting topic for all of us that connected to the CCI to explore more. And what the opportunities there, and we think, again, we are chances in the change, we think glass half full. what the opportunities are also for typical French hierarchical, let's say, leaders that think that way, how we help them to move to a more digital leader, because it is also much more fun to do.
Yeah, and perhaps an interesting topic for our next webinar series, right, Jorn?
Absolutely, I'm happy
Okay.
to make.
Yes, so that was me. Sorry, that was me subtly trying to gently push you towards the next slide, so that we keep on schedule.
Perfect, we will. But good question. Thanks, Nelly, for that. So we wanted to talk about digital leaders, what we think are typical skills, characteristics, mindset. Now, we've put together some points. Of course, they could be endless, but we just start with this, and it'd be interesting to have your views on it as well. So we think that the typical skills of a digital leader, of course, they probably are very good communicators, as leaders normally should be, but now digitally. So how do you communicate digitally? And that's not only using your emails and send a mail to all. It's frequent. It is staying in touch. It is asking questions. How are you doing? It is evolving through digital. It is also sharing information very frequently, because information is important for people to do their jobs. So a good, frequent digital communicator, various tools, at least the tools that everybody would be getting its or her hands on. A leader with very digital skills also is a very motivating person. A person that still has his or her vision on leadership, but more on the transformative side. So where are we? Where is it going to? What route are we taking? They may not have the end state in mind, although that's a very agile term, but they need to live with that uncertainty. So how to keep stimulating, motivating their workforce and maybe the rest of the company to keep the speed, the pace of speed, and how to deal with that. So you would motivate your people on that leadership and how that is transformative and how people can enjoy, participate, and contribute to that transformative journey. And we're all in this era where transformations are everywhere. So in that sense, you need to become very flexible or very adaptable as a leader. When one idea doesn't work, you go to the next. When one concept seems to fail, you adopt to another one, and do that fast. Because if you stay to something that doesn't work, it means basically death to the company. You need to adapt very fast. Technique is there, use it, but technology also sort of is the need to keep on exploring new ideas for your products, your services, your customers, but also for your ways of working and for the greater good. And then you cannot do without talent, can you? So talent and hunt for talent has always been there, to identify and mobilize talent, and then you do that digitally. So how to tap into the networks of talent of other companies, and you do that with recruitment. How do you identify that? How do you mobilize talent? How do you make sure that a talented person is actually contributing to the best of its abilities? So that whole mobilizing in a digital framework is important for a digital leader. And then inclusiveness, we talked about that with D&I, but now inclusive innovation even. So innovation is also high on the agenda, but you can do that best if everybody feels included in that innovative, or make that they're part of it. So how to stimulate that? How to stimulate that you are open for creative new ideas? How to bring risks to some ideas, and monitor that, experiment. Um, and in the speed that we talked about a couple of times, speed is more important now than perfection. So how to value, no, well, you value speed or perfection, but how to make sure that you make decisions in time without having every other data and look through it over and over. Speed is important. And with experimentation, you could say maybe it's not perfect, but at least it's a decision. At least we have speed, and we would improve and adapt over time if this is the right direction. But there's no more luxury of waiting and seeing if everything's perfect, because the next solution in the market has been already invented by somebody else. And then using data, cultivate, leverage data, of course. That is, the data is the new gold, but how to actually leverage it is a skill. How to deal with data, how to translate data to knowledge that Arthur Clarke has been advising us, how to make smart decision making. So you use your data, you collect it, but you make sure as a digital leader that you are supple and lenient in understanding what the data gives you on data points to make your decisions on. And then the disruptor's mindset, I like that, because digital leaders, even in the very model that we know, are becoming more this spider in the web people. So they're also breaking down hierarchies. A good digital leader is not married to hierarchy. It is more in facilitating the workforce to become, perform at their best. So having that mindset, but disruption is also with regards to business models, solutions, bringing out new stuff, meaning that you're going to obsolete old stuff. And that's a mindset that you need to have. You're probably breaking down any silos because we want to collaborate over these silos. So there's still some silos in place, understandably, but it doesn't mean they have to work in silos. Yeah. So how to work cross silo would be even better. Breaking them down, maybe probably more a future scenario that I see happen. Yeah. So you have your specialty, but why work in a silo? So that collaboration is stimulated. And then this one we picked up, Nady, together. Distinguish the signal from the noise. There's a lot of data. There's a lot of knowledge. There's a lot of rumors. There's a lot of there's noise. You need to how to pick up the signal, how to pick up the right bits of information that lead you, that you want to pick up, that you want to work with.
Yes.
So understanding how to pick the right signals from, to getting the right tree from the park or the wood, if you will. Yes, Nelly.
Yes. So I have another interesting question, or actually maybe an interesting addition from Vincent in the chat. Vincent, who, by the way, also, if not everyone has seen it yet, shared an interesting resource about the Dutch and what they could teach the world about remote work. So you can find the link in the chat. Anyhow, the question regarding the slides you just talked about, Jorn, is that we see, of course, in the slide many of these 21st century skills, also many so-called soft skills that may actually become hard ones, as we said in the preparation for this webinar. So what about empathy and intercultural sensitivity, he asks?
Very, very important. And I think it's actually in the next slides, if I'm not mistaken. But indeed, can I come back to this question a little bit later on, because he has a very good point, and this is what we talk about in the right brain of the hemisphere, and it is also the same area where we think the creativity sits. So
yes.
Including people, making sure everybody's comfortable, of course, is everything to do with soft side, you could say. But I think we are living in a time frame when the soft becomes the new hard, meaning All that soft skills that we used to say it's not important, and that's whatever, it's not so interesting. Now it becomes the most important skills to have, because also with those skills you would innovate, because AI takes over the rest. So as a leader, you now becoming the orchestrator of how to motivate people, and that is only the soft skills, yet using technology. So using data, AI, but that is more a commonality. It has become a commonality. So you use your infrastructure digitally well to increase the soft side of your your skills, your leadership skills, digitally, but the softer side. So it's a very interesting point, and I will come back in the last chapter in the right brain hemisphere where that sits exactly. So hold on to that thought.
So now I think we need to start valuing speed a little bit as well, Jorn. So I would say
I looked at the clock. Yes. So we'll go a bit faster through the two characteristics. It's about transforming people. It's about new ways of working. So that's a characteristic that we typically see in digital leaders. It's the inspiring stuff, which is, again, coming back to Vincent's, the softer side, how to inspire people. It means you have to understand people and how to be an inspiring leader. But you also need to persuade and influence. So a lot of the softer sides come back into this slide with the characteristics. Persuading and influencing is you use your technical digital skills, but it is the understanding people, how they can be influenced and how to persuade them with the soft skills. It's actually there written in the third bullet, soft skills and drive change. Develop digital skills across the organization and the ability to teach. This was an earlier question. You need to help and train and teach people also when they are not digitally literate yet. But it is further than only the technical skills. So we think it's also it's a mindset of lifelong learning attitude. You learn as a leader ongoingly. You cannot say that you know it all, because your crowd of your people probably know more together than you as leader, and you should even promote that. But you help train and coach, but also mentor on how to be, feel comfortable in your way. So that's your digital leadership is also teaching and helping. You need to understand your audience, of course. This is a little bit more common remark with user needs, making those journeys, no assumptions. You use your data to understand also your customers. That same goes for your employees, of course. So using feedback, research, etc., to make your product services, but also understand your as an audience. Then provide a mandated budget to test and embed digital technology. What we say here is experiment. Go and experiment. Make the tests. Use it. But we give you the mandate for it. And then leverage those digital communities that we talked about. Continuously improve and find the right talent. And with this topic, we also think that in recruitment, we should even innovate recruitment, that they are more focused on the mindset rather than the skills in recruitment. So if you have a mindset of lifelong learning, that's probably a more interesting skill and talent to look for than people with hard skills. Integrating digital process and technologies speaks for itself, and using and dealing with data. We talked about it a couple of times. So let's move on to the next slides, where we talk a little bit about mindsets. Mindset, muscle, and metal. Now, metal is maybe a word that not everybody's familiar with, but metal is actually dealing with complexity. And that same goes for ambiguity in the Foucault world. But understanding complexity, dealing with it, and not, we'll deal with it. With mindset here, and mindset, bear in mind, is in the lowest parts of the iceberg, the thing that you see, that you can really not see. So on the bottom of the iceberg, there's mind, And yet it is so important to make sure that, that you have the right mindset. And as a digital leader, you enable new ways of thinking and doing constantly. Cultivating a culture of experimentation, take risks. You adapt, you adopt, you improve, you're change oriented, you have an open mind, and you go for innovation. But you cannot do it alone, you do it with your workforce. You create an environment where new leaders can step up. You actually even promote potential leaders, if you see it, even if they become better than you. So you do not think in terms of hierarchy, but you actually stimulate leadership where you see it. That's another good trademark of a good digital leader. You help people to succeed, set them up for success, not for failure. Yeah? And even probably reward that success. And if it fails, then you take the heat as a digital leader. Very much a different attitude. Live and cope with uncertainty in the VUCA world, very much understandable when we talked about VUCA. Being resilient. Journeys used to go from A to B in projects and programs. Now they go from A to somewhere. You course correct over time. This is where Agile steps in. You have an end in mind, but maybe the reality tomorrow is different, and you course correct over time. And you do that with your team. Even maybe your team are picking up the signal before you do, and you adapt and adopt. So that's becoming resilient, because change is there. You cannot resist that change going forward. And then you blend that traditional and new skills, and you do that effectively. And of course, you're all in businesses, so we're all producing products and services. We do it more digital, making those digital products with a measurable value. So again, you use data points to measure it. And then you continue update knowledge. Your knowledge needs to be up to date. That's the athlete in the digital leader that keeps on training, keeps on performing, and making sure that it's on top of the latest trends, because you want to avoid any kind of obsolescence. So I've sped up these couple of slides, and we did that
well
because
done.
we have still a couple of more slides to go. So bear with us, guys. Unless there's any other questions, let me move on with these last two chapters. Trust, talent, and creativity. Trust is the very basis in which a digital leader can thrive. Now, Patrick Lencioni has crafted his pyramid of trust, and the trust is the bottom layer as a foundation for any high-performing teams. So I thought I put that in. A lot of people and remote workers do not think they have all the information yet to do their jobs well. Hence, that we need they feel to gain the trust that all the information is accessible, and democratizing data. Because also that your people, your employees know the business probably better than you do, because they're out there in the field and having their own networks. So better rely on them, and therefore you need to trust them, and they need to trust you. So that trust as a basis is so bloody important. Without trust, you are not going to have a conflict. You have a fear of conflict. You would not have any conflict. It means that also that when they're going to ask for commitment, that they may say yes, but actually do not feel committed, because I do not trust you or the team or the leader. And I do not dare to speak up or have a healthy conflict, so we understand where we are. Therefore, I'm not committed. And then any accountability is gone. And when all those 4 layers are gone, you can forget about your collective company results. Patrick Lencioni, really very interesting guy to follow. And trust starts with vulnerability. Now, again, here you have a soft angle, coming back to one of the questions. Vulnerability as a leader is okay to have, because it sort of invites trust. It says, I'm also only human. I do not have all the answers yet. We live in this VUCA world, but let's do it together and have trust among ourselves so we can understand where we are. So
Yes.
Scaling trust. Yes, Nelly.
Yes, and a very interesting one again from Vincent. He says, and add compassion to this list in COVID-19 times, which is very true.
Compassion, and compassion also includes the word passion, for that matter. and I'm a strong believer of both. So compassion for people, almost the Buddhists as a leader that has trust, but also bring in the passion as a leader and very authentic leader. And that is building, and not only trust, it builds the inclusion, the diversity, the mobilization of the workforce. And that is, so it's a long list in digital leaders, don't you think, Nelly? It's a lot to do, but very important. This is really where we're going to. And I think when you do this well, you know, you'll be surprised how much energy there is out there that you can bring back into the company, in your products and services and what have you. Now, I promised this picture with everybody that is interested in the softer side. That now becomes hard, because with the digital age, there is a saying that everything that can be digitized or automized will be. It also means something else. And this is going back to that first picture about what it also means that AI intelligence is over, more is overcoming the human intelligence. Huh? What does it also means that everything that cannot be digitized or automated will become more of a value. So we talk about the right brain. The right brain is where you have the softer side. This is all kind of stuff that we take from the right brain. You know, it's creativity, it's intuition, it is the compassion that we just that Vincent just mentioned, consciousness, imagination, but it's also about ethics, judging whether we should do this with technology, yes or no. Huh? We can do something with technology, but it also could be a bad thing to do. So how to work with ethics nowadays? And Gerd Leonard really teaches us to almost found a world foundation of ethics to understand how to use technology still right and not on the wrong side. So right brain, I would bet it. I would think it become more valuable, more interesting. It is the human only work. Everything that can be digitized will take over the harder skills and the technology skills of people. But with the innovation and the creativity, that's human only. That is not something AI can do. And I think that's where your humans are becoming very valuable. Maybe.
Yes, and hence why you said soft skills are becoming the new hard skills, to put it that way. I have an interesting note, by the way, coming from Stefan in the chat, and he says this is related to neurodiversity. People with, for instance, dyslexia, dyscalculia, ADD, ADHD, autism are right brain focused. So I think that's an interesting addition to the slides.
It is very much, and it is including. It is about inclusion of everybody. So there's no more cloning of people. We need to include everybody, and there's people with some kind of what we would maybe say a disability that may become an ability in the future because we haven't looked at the talent behind the disability. So there's a lot of research going on in how to make the workforce accessible for everybody, and so that everybody's talents can be added to what we need to innovate. And that's why we would say in our first webinars, use the wisdom of the crowd, of the collective crowd. It means everybody involved, because maybe this guy that we said, maybe he has some disability, comes up with an idea that nobody had before. That's why you need to include him and make him, this person, feel comfortable. So Steven has got a very valid point in that, for that matter.
Absolutely. Okay, I think this is where we can move on.
Move on. I know I'm a bit of time, but there's just 2 more slides to go, and then I'll leave you off the hook for unless there's people that can say. Because now, how do you orchestrate? Now, I don't have the magic answer, but there's 1 or 2 slides that I wanted to show you with how to orchestrate the workforce as a digital leader. I put some guiding principles out there. Right in the middle is being the architect of the network. The spider web, it sits there right in the middle. But it means that you probably lead without authority, but more with the power of persuasion and influence. And that you have a coaching mindset, that you are a digital leader that is no longer the boss or the manager, but is looked at as somebody that has aspirations and right intentions and addresses the strengths of people and sort of take care of where there's maybe a weakness or how to help a person become better. It is also about the information democracy, and I think we said this before a couple of times. Sharing is very important. Make sure the information is available. This is also in favor of being agile. We talked about inclusive culture many times now. That is also an organizing principle, very much to the last point that Stefan mentioned. You reimagine business models and strategies ongoingly. You need to make sure that, you know, even if you've just come up with a new strategy, already start thinking about the next and picking up the signals from the market where this would go. You know, what's the 2.0, the 3.0, and what have you. You move on. You keep on moving. And therefore, you need to make sure that you can fail fast as a leader. Fail fast are taking in experiments and risks, and then we learn from them, because failing fast means learning fast. So it shouldn't be a problem. Rather, in the past we say, if you make a failure, it's really bad and you should be ashamed. Now you should be rewarded because you have prevented the rest from taking the same mistake. And outside-in orientation, of course, you look into the market, you do the research, you're focused, you're aware of trends, and you bring them in. So that external orientation is key to reach, your destination faster than your competitors. They can only be done with an outside-in orientation and being very agile. Agile as a cornerstone of a digital leader. This is really something there to stay. It begins with leaders before you embed it in teams. So you need to give the right example with agile and innovating and taking risks. So those are a couple of guiding principles in orchestrating the workforce. And
can I just hold you there for 1 second, Jorn, please? Because we're having another interesting France-Netherlands question, because this fail fast leader that you just mentioned, Vincent says this is an excellent concept. Certainly there is a difference between France and the Netherlands there.
Well, I think based on our earlier discussion about the differences between how French see the power distance versus the Dutch. So I'm a bit careful because I haven't really worked in France in companies, but I think the French are normally like to have things right. And they're also a bit more, they want to make sure that any failure is not too obvious. And maybe the same goes for the Dutch, but the Dutch are more easy in discussing any failure and learning from it, because it doesn't mean that they lose face. In an Asian culture, probably losing face is a really bad thing. Western culture is less, but within our Western world, we also have differences. I think in a typical Dutch culture, it's more easily addressed in a dialogue, and also people dare to step up to their leaders much more easily. When I see my colleagues in the French company, they basically do not speak very easily because they are afraid to make a mistake, and that is also perception. But it probably has an exchange with the leaders that they're talking to that makes them a less trustworthy atmosphere. Like I'm either not waiting for your comments or and also not waiting for your failure. We want to do this my way, and I want you to do it right in one time. So I think there's differences, but we would need to explore it a bit more, maybe in that next webinar that you suggested, Nelly. And I think
Yes.
if you want to go digital all the way and fast, yeah, there needs to be that trust level and that option to fail when we can learn from it and to improve ongoingly with Agile. So if you preach Agile, you preach digital, I think there is no escape from openly failing fast.
Yeah, and I think in that sense, perhaps what we've just been experiencing through COVID-19, I think that may have accelerated things into a good direction towards this fail fast leader also for perhaps in other countries in Europe, don't you think?
I think, and bear in mind, it happens. Agile was something quite new, completely opposite of hierarchical thinking, and now it's here to stay. So it is just sometimes one culture adapts a bit faster than another, but eventually agile is everywhere. So it is also a matter of time, yeah, and how fast you can adopt. So it's a matter of time.
Fantastic, thank you, Jorn. I think we can move on again.
We'll move on. Just 2 more slides, guys. We cannot spend too much time on it, but I think a digital leader understands people, and when you understand people, you would appreciate HR a lot more. So you do not have to do everything yourself as a digital leader, but use HR when we talk about the first acronym, the human part. Yeah. So HR is about helping with digital analytics and engagement and well-being, and it should all be on the HR agenda. So partner with HR to make sure that you bring all that on board. So I think HR is always reaching out as I want to be your business partner, and I think the digital leader reaches out to HR and says, please become my partner in becoming a digital leader. So the slide just says, trends in HR, use HR as your partner, because it's important to help together mobilize that workforce and do any tips, tricks, training, whatever you do not see yet as a digital leader, HR can help you there. So that's the one slide I wanted to put in. I think digital leaders embrace and partner with HR. And then the last slide I wanted to wrap this all up with is this construct, when I think like a visual, thanks to Steven Twicht, who helps me visualize these things. Digital leaders leverages essential working principles to unlock the collective potential of the workforce. And that drives company innovation. So of course, you're in it not to become a health center, you still want business innovation, but that digital leader now with the right mindset, skills, characteristics, and with the right mobilizing principles, and with the right, elements that we talked about in previous sessions, the virtual engagement, the remote well-being, digital networks, and now partnering with HR, you could orchestrate that workforce as a spider in the web, digital leader, and that if you build that construct, I think you are on top of your innovation, and you could, not beat the market, but at least make sure you survive that way, because otherwise you get eaten. So that visual, I'll leave you with that visual. I know we're 15 minutes late, and I just wanted to pause here, open up for questions. But before that, I want to thank you for staying with me for for a bit longer, and I hope we can keep this discussion going, and I'm very interested in your further input and feedback. So back to you, Nelly.
Yes, thank you very much, Jorn. Well, first of all, I think you did really well timing-wise, because we had some really interesting questions and interactions. So I'm personally very pleased with that. It's been a big pleasure to be here this morning with all of you and having so many questions. And I actually have another one for you, Jorn, from Casper, who asks, can you substantiate HR embraces digital leadership? Because as we've presented it now, it's presented as a given, and he hears that R&D leaders cringe about the absence of that HR connection between leadership and design. So I think this is coming back to the part where you mentioned HR just now.
So if I don't know if I understood the question completely clear, but so how we stimulate that connection between HR leadership, is that what?
No, it's the slide presents it as a given. It happens.
Yeah, this slide, it presents it as a given, and it's not, right?
Right. I hear much more complaining, and especially in COVID times, that HR has taken the leadership, but now has a hard time following up. Right?
Yes,
so
that's right.
Over demanded as such, and that these digital leaders now also need to tackle all these HR topics, right?
That's correct.
Where's HR? Where's HR? Where's HR? Right?
That's correct. That's correct. And I have, my explanation would be this one. I think before COVID and before digitization really kicked in, the business, and I used to be in HR a bit, the business more or less put HR on the spot to say, you have not got your numbers right. So they asked and maneuvered HR to the number side and used HR a lot for efficiency, for layoffs, for numbers, and the human side of HR disappeared over time that I saw, and was a worrying business. But the business was right when they said you cannot make your numbers. You cannot even answer a question, how many employees we've got working here. So they're right in that sense. But HR, sort of in general terms, was not really evolving to the H in the HR lately, and now they have to. So HR has a big task, and I think they're behind, and that's what we're here to help them with, to become more in the center point of the business, to be with the right digitization tooling, to make numbers quickly and efficiently, so also HR can do much more of the human stuff that they're out there in the first place for. So I agree with you, and HR needs help, but HR also needs to be helped with the digital leader to say, let's do this then together, but let's not put everything on the digital leader. You do your bit as well, and I endorse you to do so. So I would rather see a partnership evolving in understanding what we should do, rather than say who needs to do which bit, but together understand that you need to evolve that the right brain, the human, the softer side of HR back in the veins of an organization, because we are talking about really the human side, and which is the right brain side, in belonging, evolving, contributing. And now I think leadership in business and HR need to come together and really address that. So there's work to do, but you're right there, Casper.
So I think this is where we go back to Sylvie then.
Yeah, maybe we can go back to the reunion forum where we stop screen sharing, and I have one last poll for you I would like to launch.
So I stopped my screen sharing, Sylvie?
Yeah, because then if we want to have some interaction still between us, it's nice to be in a reunion mode. Let me just ask you the last question. I'm going to launch the polling now. So wondering what we should have started by the question and maybe ended by the question. I'm thinking now, let's see whether the people have changed their mind after your presentation, Jorn. Yes, a few more seconds and I'm going to end the polling and show you the results. So 90% crucial and nice to have one 10%. So I'm going to stop share the results. Well, like Nelly already said, it was so interesting, and I think it's okay that we were a little bit longer also because it was much more interactive. So logical that, of course, your presentation was a little bit longer. So I think it's only a very good sign. Maybe now we can also unmute. You can unmute yourself if you have anything to share. It would be nice if we can still have a nice discussion. I think what's interesting is indeed my question about the difference between France and the Netherlands in the development, because I think in general you could say that maybe in Holland we already had a more bottom-up way of working, and there's much more top-down way of working still in France. That's so of course I generalize, and we always have to be very careful with generalization, but I think I can imagine that going to the remote way of working, and already homework was more common in the Netherlands. So I can imagine that the step to this new way of working during COVID time is easier in the Netherlands than in France. So that was a little indeed my question. I know Vincent is an expert. And
what I noticed, I added the word safe to it. You know, it's very much about the right brain, about empathy and creativity, but it's also about creating a safe environment for engineers where they can produce without feeling threatened by outside environments and too many discussions and dangerous remarks, right? And I think in that sense, me, stupid, brutal Dutch, I learned from the French, meaning politeness in the French culture to deal with each other is exactly like that example, creating a safe environment where it's not dangerous to be seen, to be heard, to participate. So there's also another side to it. I believe Dutch, you know, your equal system. I prepare my candidates in recruitment by saying, you know, be interactive in your interviews because that's expected. You're equal to your interviewer. But that's one side of the medal. It's super scary for them to do that. It's super scary. So I feel engineers looking for that safety rather than, you know, just do it, use your right side. And I think the French are more subtle at that. At being creating that safe, polite environment to thrive for an engineer.
interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. And we touched upon psychological safety as a research the other day, maybe not in these webinars, but that's an interesting topic to research, psychological safety and what that means. And we can learn from, you know, that's how I also like to do this. Let's learn from the French and the Dutch and hopefully use best of both worlds. That's the best way in learning from each other. So that could be an interesting topic with Vincent to further explore. But thanks for your input. Yeah.
Are there any more remarks?
No,
Yes, Vincent.
No, I mean, psychological safety is extremely important in the process of diversity, inclusion, belonging, well-being, the whole paradigm that's you know, given at each stage. Certainly, I completely agree with it.
It could be a really interesting topic, and hopefully not via webinar, but via a real round table in real life after summer, where we can touch these topics, and where we speak about diversity, but also about the difference between France and the Netherlands. And I love the topic, how we can also learn from each other, because often they ask me about the differences and then they immediately say difficulties with it. And I always try really to say that differences does not automatically mean difficulty. So I'm always trying to accentuate that, yes, we have difference between France and the Netherlands, but if we learn from each other, if we respect each other, and if we simply try to find the best of both worlds, it's certainly not a difficulty. It's a complex, how do you say that? It's complementaire.
Complementary talent. This is one of my phrases that I used to say now for 10 years. Complementary talent. I'm a strong believer in that. You have to identify talent and understand the talent that you do not have, but is with somebody else. And I think leadership is not about any longer about I should know everything because if you know more, you're a threat. No. I think the 21st century leader says, you will know and experience more than I do, and I better do everything that I can to help you do that as fast as possible, because that is a leadership with trust and mentorship that is worthy of the cause. And that's also an interesting trait to do as a mentor, as a leader, and to do that digitally as well. Okay, sure, we talk about that. But that's that thinking, that's new ways of thinking from leadership point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. And besides that, I think especially technological developments, they are going too fast right now for one person to be able to stay on top of everything that's happening. And that in addition to all the other skills and things that a digital leader needs to master.
Exactly. So we're talking about a new ecosystem, an episteme, and that is your just the ape on the rock, but it's the colony of ants that do this together and invent and adapt and adopt. You know, that's a new metaphor. And
Yeah.
that's where you need the wisdom of the crowd and enable that. Yeah.
If I may, Don?
Yes.
I really liked your slides because it made me think. So I was like shuffling on my seat during some of the slides. And I talk very much out of the experience of digital leaders as leaders of R&D departments who are important, if not crucial, to create growth in the company, right? To quickly introduce new products into a company. And I saw one slide, I think it's like the drie na laatste, sorry about the Dutch, where it talks about, you know, this digital leader having all these skills in one, you know, being able to come up with new business models, being empathetic, giving politically correct space and safe space to his employees, empowering, totally impossible. And if I link it to how these digital leaders of these type of departments, in my experience, operate, is that they can very much relate to their staff, to their engineering staff, and how they operate and how they function best. And it's a dilemma, of course. So where does that hamper or stop other developments? And in my experience, it has to do with generating the growth and introducing faster and faster and more products to help the company as a whole to proceed. So leading a group as a manager, a digital leader of engineers, meaning correct, etc. And at the same time, your brain needs to allow that creativity, right? That true part of bringing forward, coming up with new business model, generating the growth, etc. And that's where the dilemma hurts sometimes. You know, if R&D departments become too defensive about their group and not looking at entrepreneurial development and growth, then the R&D department as a whole fails because it doesn't deliver fast enough, fast enough to the whole company, right? So that's where I feel that balance hurts. And it was exactly a diagonal in your slide where on the top it says, you know, defensive, help your engineering crowd to produce, right? And on the bottom right, it talks about growth and introducing new products and you know, taking the market, what the company demands. After all, that's what the department is about. It's not about, you know, happily remote working. It's about producing products faster that make the company own the market, right? And come up with competing products compared to the tech companies from the US. So it was a nice slide to indicate where this balance should be. I see R&D departments sometimes lose the advantage.
It's quite some observation. Sorry, anybody else? Or no? There's quite some things to say about this. First of all, I think about complementary talent. So even as a digital leader, you have some talent and some talents that you can further evolve. But of course, maybe there's other people in the group or other leaders that have another set of talents that you would like to work with together. So I of course, it's an ideal world sort of presenting, but it's just to make sure that you, as a digital leader, you at least understand a lot of these assets and you're better in the one than the other, but already admitting that you're better in one than the other is already a step forward. So that's consciousness. Yeah. Another thing with regards to research and development, and I always call this preferably, we look at a ambidextrous organization where you say, we've got R&D and they need to have a sort of a separate set of culture and values. And when the pearls come out of there, you know, from the 100 ideas, there's 2 that really see the light and say, that's fantastic, innovative, then you would, you know, hand them over to another skill set in a company of the mother company that is all about scale and efficiency and effectiveness, etc. And I just learned and picked up the other day about Jeffrey Moore that talked about the win zone, and that would be an interesting for you to explore, where there's 4 separate zones, where the one zone is about performance and making sure the numbers are done, whereas the RD organization is probably more an incubator zone, etc. And how to leverage those separate zones so that each zone can make the best of the performance. So that's an interesting new perspective in the entire epistem, but still having separate zones that make the best of each talent and performance. So very interesting.
Yeah. I have to round up, but I think we can say that we can organize a follow-up again, because there's so much to talk about still. So I would like to thank, first of all, Jorn and Nelly for your contribution for those 3 webinars, very interesting webinars. I would like to thank you as an audience to be very interactive, because that's what we hoped for. Because if you want to use the wisdom of the crowd, we want to use your wisdom, of course. So thank you very much for your participation, and I am sure that we're going to follow up on this, because yeah, we just haven't finished talking. So thank you very much, and I hope to speak to you soon.
Thanks for hosting, Sylvie, and thanks all for it. And let's see each other again soon, whether digitally or face-to-face.
Exactly.
Very good suggestion. Yeah.
Okay.
We have LinkedIn for that, you know, digital networkers, right?